He left me alone at the hospital because his girlfriend needed him more. That's what the nurse told me when I woke up, disoriented, tubes still taped to my arms. My son, my only son, promised he'd wait while I went in for surgery, promised he'd be there when I opened my eyes. But instead, it was a stranger holding my hand, a kind nurse, trying to hide the look of pity on her face. That moment, something broke, not just in my body, but in the part of me that still believed he cared. You don't raise a child expecting anything in return. At least, that's what I always told myself. You give because it's your duty, your joy, your purpose. And for a long time, raising my son was exactly that, my entire purpose. When Marjorie passed, everything changed. I was 39, working night shifts as a janitor at the local high school, and suddenly I was a father and a mother to a boy who had just learned to tie his own shoes. She had been the heart of our home, calm, warm, always humming something under her breath while she cooked. Losing her felt like a thunderclap in the chest that never stopped echoing, but I didn't have time to grieve the way I wanted to. I had a little boy with big eyes asking me, "Where's Mommy?" So I put on a brave face. I learned how to braid hair for picture day because Marjorie used to do that for our nieces. I taught myself how to make grilled cheese and pack lunches that didn't embarrass him. I worked extra shifts to pay for school trips and new shoes, even if it meant I sometimes slept in the custodial closet between shifts. I showed up to every baseball game, every spelling bee, even when I was running on fumes. And when he'd fall asleep in the back seat of the car after a long day, I'd look at him and think, this is what love is. This is what it means to be a father. He was a sweet kid back then. He used to draw little cards for me. "Best dad ever," he wrote on one, the E backward, the letters shaky but proud. I kept it taped above my workbench in the garage for 20 years. Even when the ink faded, I knew every line by heart. He was always curious, wanted to know how things worked. I taught him how to change a tire in our gravel driveway, both of us covered in grease and sweat, laughing like idiots. When he got older, he wanted to help with house repairs. We built that deck together, the one he now calls rotting and unsafe. Back then, it was our fortress. He carved his initials into one of the beams with a pocket knife. I never painted over it. I didn't have much money. God knows I tried. Every dollar I earned went into that house, into that boy. When he got accepted into college, I cried harder than I did at my own wedding. I didn't want him to worry about loans, so I cashed out the small life insurance policy Marjorie left behind. It was meant for retirement, but I figured I had time. I could work a few more years. He deserved a chance at a better life, and he took it with both hands. I was proud of him. I told everyone at the school, the teachers, the other janitors. "My boy's studying marketing," I'd say. "He's gonna be somebody." I kept his acceptance letter folded in my wallet for years. It was creased and stained from sweat, but it felt like a trophy. Proof that I hadn't failed. Even when he started drifting, phone calls getting shorter, visits getting fewer, I blamed his schedule. "He's just busy," I told myself. "He's building a life. That's what we raised him for." There was a time he'd come home and ask, "Need anything fixed, Dad?" And I'd hand him a toolbox, pretending I couldn't reach the top shelf just to feel needed. He still called me Pops for a while, said it with a grin that made me forget how tired I was. He brought his girlfriend around, the one who would become his wife. She seemed polite enough at first, though she wrinkled her nose at our wallpaper and muttered something about doing a real renovation someday. I laughed it off. Young people always want shiny new things, but even then, the visits started to feel different. Less about spending time with me, more like checking a box. They'd stay just long enough to take pictures in front of the house, the same house I built with Marjorie's dream in every nail and beam, and then disappear for another few months. No more helping with repairs. No more sitting on the porch with me, sipping lemonade, talking about nothing and everything. Still, I didn't complain. I told myself it was enough that he was doing well, that he was happy, that maybe one day he'd bring his own children back to that house, and I'd hear the sound of little feet running across the hardwood floors again. I kept the place tidy, mowed the lawn every Saturday, repainted the porch myself, even when my back begged me not to. I wanted it to feel like home for him whenever he decided to return, and sometimes he did. Sometimes he'd bring wine and tell me about his job. Big accounts now, Dad. 6 figures, finally. I'd smile and nod, even when I didn't understand half of what he was saying. He never asked about my work, not really. Just assumed I'd retired already. I hadn't. I couldn't afford to. But I didn't tell him that. I didn't want to burden him. I just wanted him to know that I was proud, that I loved him. Always had. Always would. At least, that's what I thought back then. Before I realized he saw me not as a father, but as a relic, a piece of old furniture in a house he thought would be his. Before the hospital, before the silence, before the moment I finally stopped making excuses. It didn't happen all at once. That's the cruel part of it. The change came slowly, like a leak in the roof you don't notice until the ceiling caves in. The first time I felt it, really felt it, was Thanksgiving 3 years ago. He and his wife showed up late, nearly 2 hours after the food had gone cold. No call, no message, just waltzed in with a store-bought pie and a rushed apology. Traffic was insane, she said, not even looking up from her phone. He gave me a quick side hug, already unzipping his coat. Didn't ask how I was feeling after my fall the week before. Didn't notice the fresh stitches near my temple. He barely glanced at the table I'd set with Marjorie's old china. Didn't comment on the stuffing, her recipe, which used to be his favorite. I remember watching him scroll on his phone while I tried to carve the turkey, my hands shaking a little more than usual. And when I dropped the carving fork by accident, he flinched like I'd interrupted something important. That was the first real crack. I told myself it was just stress, work, city life, marriage. Maybe they'd had a fight in the car. I still wanted to believe the best of him. But over the months that followed, the cracks widened. He started forgetting things. My birthday, for one. That had never happened before. Used to call first thing in the morning, every single year, no matter where he was. That year, I waited all day by the phone. Even baked myself a little cake. Just a boxed mix, but it felt like something to do. The call never came. When I finally texted him, hours later, he replied, "Oh man, I'm the worst. Been slammed. Love you though, Pops." Love you though. Like it was an afterthought. Like I was a calendar notification he'd dismissed. Then there were the home visits, fewer and fewer. And when they did happen, they came with comments. Little jabs, casual but sharp. "Still got this old recliner, huh? When are you going to get Wi-Fi in this place? Man, this wallpaper's straight out of a horror movie." He said them with a laugh, like it was all a joke. But the message underneath was clear. This wasn't his home anymore. It was a place he tolerated, not cherished. His wife was worse. She never called me by my name. Always "your dad" when speaking to him, never to me. She'd breeze in, look around like she was touring a fixer-upper, and mutter things like, "We'll definitely need to gut the kitchen someday." Right in front of me. Not if, when. And he never corrected her. I started noticing how often they mentioned their apartment. The view, the location, the gym downstairs. Then came the first time he said it, so casually, over coffee in my kitchen one Sunday. "This place has good bones, you know. You'd make a killing if you sold it. Retire somewhere warm. Florida, maybe?" I just looked at him. Your mother's buried 5 blocks from here." He blinked like he hadn't thought of that, or maybe like he didn't care. "Well, just an idea," he said, sipping his coffee. The shift became impossible to ignore after I loaned him money. He called one night, said they'd hit a rough patch, car trouble, something about a bonus being delayed. Asked if I could float them a few thousand just until next month. Of course I said yes. Didn't even hesitate. I wired the money the next morning. That was the last I heard of it. No follow-up, no thank you, no repayment. When I gently brought it up 2 months later, more out of curiosity than need, he brushed it off. "Oh, right. Yeah, we're still getting things sorted. Appreciate your help, Pops." And then he changed the subject. I started feeling like an ATM with a pulse, and not even a frequently used one. The hardest part wasn't the money. It was the distance, the subtle shift in tone, the way he called less, texted less, and never quite met my eyes when he did come around, like he was already somewhere else. I remember sitting alone one night, flipping through an old photo album Marjorie had made, those thick pages with plastic sleeves labeled in her perfect handwriting. Birthday parties, Christmas mornings, his first day of school. There was one picture of us on the porch. He was maybe 7 or 8, hugging me with both arms, big toothy grin on his face. I stared at it for what felt like hours. Where did that boy go? Where did my boy go? I still mowed the lawn every week, still swept the porch and fixed the leaky faucet in the bathroom. I even started replacing the roof shingles one by one on my own. I told myself it was for him, for the family he'd have one day, for the legacy. But somewhere deep down, I knew I was just trying to hold on to something that was already slipping away. One night I heard a strange sound outside. Turned out to be the neighbor's son helping his dad carry groceries inside. The son laughed, said something about cooking together. I watched them through the window, and I felt something I'd never felt before in my life. Jealousy. Not of their money or their house, just of the way that boy looked at his father, like he mattered, like he belonged. That's when I started keeping track of the silences, not just the missed calls, but the way he'd sigh when I asked simple questions, the way he'd sit on the couch without really being there. The shift wasn't sudden, but it was steady, relentless. And one day I woke up and realized I hadn't seen my son in over 6 weeks. No messages, no visits, no check-ins after my doctor's appointment, even though I'd told him about it. That was the morning I stopped pretending, stopped making excuses for him. The good years were over, and something colder had taken their place. It was a Sunday, early spring, the kind where the sun's warm enough to make you forget winter's still hanging around in the shade. My nephew Denny was hosting a family barbecue. He'd just moved into a new house and was proud of it, kept showing everyone the smart thermostat and granite counters. I didn't want to go at first. My knees had been aching something fierce, and I hadn't been sleeping well. But Denny called twice, said, "Come on, Uncle Joe. It wouldn't be the same without you." So I went. I made my famous potato salad, the one Marjorie always swore by, and got there right on time. My son and his wife showed up nearly an hour later, sunglasses on, iced coffees in hand like they were stepping off a movie set. He gave me a quick hug, distracted. She kissed the air near my cheek. Then they went straight to the younger cousins, the ones with Instagram pages and baby bumps and stories I didn't quite follow. I sat in the shade, paper plate in hand, watching him move through the crowd, confident, polished, like someone who'd shed his skin and wasn't looking back. I wasn't expecting a long chat, maybe just a few minutes by the grill, like we used to, but he never came over. Later in the afternoon, someone suggested a family photo. We gathered by the porch, cousins, spouses, kids clinging to pant legs. I was off to the side, trying to find my footing on the steps, when I heard her voice, loud, sharp, unmistakably hers. Well, when we take over Dad's place, we're definitely redoing the whole front. This porch is a lawsuit waiting to happen. Laughter, then his voice, just as casual. Yeah, we'll probably have to gut it. The whole house, really. But at least the lot's decent. My throat tightened. I stood there, just a few feet away, holding a paper plate with a scoop of my own potato salad. And they were talking about my house, my home, like it was some fixer-upper on a listing site, like I wasn't even there. No one said anything. Not Denny, not the cousins, not the aunt who overheard and quickly looked down at her drink. The silence was loud. It rang in my ears louder than their voices did. I stepped away, didn't say a word, just walked down the back steps and around to the front yard. I needed air, space, dignity. I sat on a bench by Denny's rose bushes, white ones, like the ones Marjorie used to grow. I stared at them until my eyes blurred. They didn't know I'd heard, or maybe they didn't care. It wasn't just what they said, it was how they said it. Like the house was already theirs, like I was already gone, like I was a hurdle to be managed, a line item in their future plans. When I got home that night, I didn't bother unpacking the leftovers. I set the container on the counter and sat at the kitchen table in the dark, the same table where Marjorie used to braid our son's hair before picture day, the table where we'd set up his science projects, his Lego castles, his birthday cakes with lopsided candles, the table he'd spilled juice on when he was 6, and I told him not to worry. We'll clean it together, buddy. Now it was just wood, empty space. I stared at the chair he used to sit in and felt something cold settle in my chest. The next morning I found myself walking around the house slowly, room by room. I touched the walls, the banister, the spot by the kitchen door where his height marks were still etched into the wood. I remembered the time he'd begged me not to erase them. "Leave them, Dad. I want to see how tall I get." He grew taller than me by 17, and now he was pretending I didn't exist. A few days later I called him, just to ask if he remembered saying anything at the barbecue. I kept my tone light, neutral. He hesitated, then laughed. "Oh, that? Come on, Pops. We were just joking around." Joking. "You know we're not in a rush or anything," he added. "But yeah, eventually, we'd love to live there, raise our kids where I grew up. That'd be nice, right?" Something about the way he said eventually, like the countdown had already started. I didn't say much, just nodded, even though he couldn't see me through the phone. After that call, I stopped answering when he rang, which wasn't often anyway. The next time I saw him, he brought over an appraiser, didn't warn me. Just knocked on the door one Saturday with a man in a tucked-in polo shirt holding a clipboard. "Just curious what it's worth," he said, smiling like this was normal. I stood there in the doorway, hands still on the knob, wondering when exactly I stopped being the owner of my own home. I didn't let them in. He looked surprised, maybe a little annoyed. "Come on, Pops. Don't be like that." I shut the door. I didn't yell, didn't curse, didn't make a scene. But in that moment something settled in me. A quiet knowing, a line drawn in the dust. It wasn't just neglect anymore, not misunderstanding, not poor communication. It was betrayal, plain and sharp, the kind you can't clean up with a phone call or a half-hearted hug. That night I pulled out the old photo albums again, not to remember but to decide what was worth saving, what was still mine. Because for the first time I realized the boy I raised wasn't coming back, and the man who'd taken his place. He had plans, but so did I. Have you ever felt betrayed by your own family? Let us know in the comments. It started with a misplaced envelope. I was sweeping the front hallway, something I did every few days, not because it needed it, but because it gave me something to do, something to control. I noticed a thick white envelope under the entry table, half hidden behind a boot tray. I picked it up, assuming it was one of my bills or a flyer, but it wasn't addressed to me. It was from a real estate agency, one I didn't recognize. My son's name was listed on the front. No Mr., no courtesy. Just his full name, printed bold as brass. Curious, I opened it. Inside was a preliminary valuation for my home, a market analysis, projections, a slick brochure that said, "Prime opportunity in a developing neighborhood." There were photos, my house, angled shots of the living room, the porch, even the backyard Marjorie and I planted with sunflowers when he was 10. I didn't remember anyone taking pictures. The pages slipped from my fingers and scattered across the floor like leaves. At first I couldn't breathe. Then I laughed. Just once, dry and bitter. Not because it was funny, but because of the sheer gall. I didn't confront him right away. I wanted to see what else he was hiding. A few days later, I went to the pharmacy to pick up a refill. The cashier, a young woman named Julia who'd always been kind to me, leaned over and whispered, "Your son was in here yesterday. Asked if we'd forward your prescriptions to a place in Brookside." Brookside. That was a retirement community 2 towns over. Gated. All beige buildings and overpriced cafeterias. I stood there, stunned, while she rang up my medicine. He hadn't said a word to me. Not a mention of moving. Not a conversation. Just made plans. Behind my back. Like I was some problem to be quietly relocated. That night, I sat in my recliner with the lights off. Didn't even turn the TV on. Just listened to the hum of the fridge and the faint creak of the house settling around me. Marjorie used to say the house had a soul. "She breathes, Joe. You just gotta listen." And that night, it felt like she was holding her breath too. I reached for the photo album again. I don't know why I kept doing that. Maybe part of me thought if I stared at those old pages long enough, the boy I remembered would come back. I paused on a photo from our trip to the lake. He was 12, skinny legs, sunburnt nose, holding a fishing rod like it was Excalibur. I remembered how he ran up to me, grinning, yelling, "I caught one! You saw, right, Dad? You were watching?" I was. I always was. That memory burned more than it comforted now. The next morning, I called the retirement community, just to see. The woman on the line, chirpy, professional, told me yes, an application had been started in my name. "We're just waiting on a final medical evaluation," she said cheerfully. "Your son said you'd be moving in by the fall." I didn't respond. I just hung up. The betrayal wasn't just in the action. It was in the assumption that I wouldn't notice, that I wouldn't resist, that I didn't matter. Later that week, I ran into Emilio. He's the janitor at the hospital. Quiet man, soft-spoken, always with a clean uniform and tired eyes. I'd met him a few months back when I was recovering from my surgery. He was the one who brought me an extra pillow when no one else noticed I was shivering. The one who stood beside my bed when I cried. Quietly, not from pain but from the silence in the room, from the empty chair where my son should have been. "Mr. Joe," he said when he saw me outside the grocery store. "You okay?" I hesitated. Then I said, "Let me buy you a coffee." We sat in the corner booth of a nearly empty diner. I told him everything. Not all at once, but in pieces, like unpacking a heavy bag. He listened, never interrupted, just sipped his coffee and nodded. He told me about his mother, how she lived with him and his kids now ever since his wife passed. "She's a handful," he said with a small smile, "but she raised me. I owe her everything." Something about the way he said it broke something loose in me. Not grief, not rage, just clarity. I went home that evening and pulled down the dusty metal box from my bedroom closet. Inside were old documents, letters, insurance papers, the original deed to the house. I laid them all out on the dining table and sat there until the sun went down. Then I called my lawyer. He hadn't heard from me in years. We used to play cards together before he retired from courtroom work, but he still handled a few clients. I told him I needed to update my will immediately. He paused. "Is everything okay, Joe?" "No," I said, "but it will be." I didn't tell him everything on the phone, just enough. We scheduled a meeting for the next afternoon. That night I stood on the back porch and looked out at the yard. The grass was patchy. The rose bushes had thinned. Marjorie's little stone angel was chipped, but it was still ours, and no one was going to take it from me, not without a fight, not without knowing the kind of man I still was underneath the quiet. Let them plan. Let them scheme. They had no idea what I was planning now. I didn't confront him in anger, not at first. I called and asked if he could come by, just the two of us. I said I wanted to talk, no accusations, no raised voice, just a father asking for a little time. He showed up a few days later, 15 minutes late, eyes on his phone even as he walked through the front door. "Everything okay, Pops?" he asked, glancing around the living room like he hadn't been here 100 times before. "Need help with something?" I nodded toward the kitchen table. "Sit with me." He dropped into the chair like it was an inconvenience, scrolling something on his screen. "Can we make it quick? We've got dinner plans at 7. That's when it happened. Something inside me settled. Not boiled, not snapped, just settled. "I found the letter," I said calmly. He looked up. "What letter?" "The appraisal, the photos, the offer from the realtor." He blinked. "Oh, that." Then a little chuckle like I was overreacting. "You weren't supposed to see that yet." "Yet?" I asked. My voice was steady, too steady. It scared even me. "Yeah," he said, waving a hand. "Look, Pops, I was going to talk to you. We were just exploring options. That house is worth a lot now. The neighborhood's changing and—" "That house," I interrupted, "is not a business asset. It's where your mother and I built a life." He shifted in his seat. "I get it. I do. But come on, Dad. You're not getting any younger. The place is falling apart. We're trying to think ahead, be responsible." "Is that why you applied to Brookside Retirement?" His face froze. I let the silence hang there. Let him feel it. "I called," I said. "They said the application was nearly complete. You were just waiting on my medical file." He stood up then, as if motion could soften the weight of his guilt. "You're twisting this. We're just trying to make sure you're safe. That's all." I stared at him. "All those years," I said. "I worked night shifts, weekends, gave up everything so you could go to college without debt. I fixed this house myself, every board, every window. Your mother gave up her dreams so we could raise you right. And now you're planning behind my back like I'm a problem to be handled." He didn't say anything, just stood there, arms crossed, eyes flitting to the clock. And then he muttered, "Well, we figured you'd be reasonable about it." Reasonable? As if stealing someone's life piece by piece was just good management. I stood up too, slowly, my knees protesting, and walked to the window. Outside, the porch sagged a little on the east side. I hadn't fixed it yet. I was waiting for spring. "I'll tell you something, son," I said without turning. "You made your plans. Now I'm making mine." He scoffed. "What does that mean?" "It means the house isn't yours to inherit, not anymore." His mouth opened, then closed. He took a step forward. "Dad." "You can go now," I said. He didn't move right away. I think he was waiting for me to laugh, to wave it off, to say I didn't mean it, but I meant every word. He left with a shrug and a quiet, "Whatever you say." That was the last time he stepped foot inside my home. Later that week, Emilio stopped by again. Not for anything big, just to drop off some canned soup his daughter had made. "She heard you like lentils," he said, smiling sheepishly. We ended up sitting on the porch, sipping coffee while the sun went down. "You look tired," he said. I nodded. "Been a long season." We didn't talk much, just watched the streetlights come on one by one. Then, after a long pause, I asked, "Do your kids ever scare you?" He looked at me, surprised. "Scare? I mean, worry you'll lose them. That one day they'll stop seeing you as a father, start seeing you as a burden." He was quiet for a while. Then he said, "My oldest son stopped talking to me 3 years ago. Over a loan I couldn't repay. Haven't heard from him since." I turned toward him. He shrugged. "Sometimes you do everything right and they still leave. That's not on you." His words didn't make the pain disappear, but they planted something. Not hope, exactly, but clarity. That night I pulled out the new will and reread it, line by line. My lawyer had done it exactly as I asked. Simple, clear, ironclad. Everything goes to Emilio. And if contested, every asset, including the house, goes directly to the local veterans shelter, the one Marjorie used to volunteer at. I sealed it back into the folder and set it in my desk drawer. For the first time in weeks, I slept soundly. The next few days, small things started shifting. I noticed neighbors waving more often. Mrs. Cartwright next door dropped off a loaf of banana bread with a note. "Heard about what happened. You're not alone." Word had gotten around, it seemed. But I didn't feel embarrassed. I felt seen. A few people, old friends from the community center, stopped by under one excuse or another. One helped patch a screen door. Another brought over an old record player he said I could borrow. People I hadn't heard from in years were coming around again. The house felt alive again. And so did I. Let my son roll his eyes. Let him mock me behind closed doors. I wasn't the one being forgotten anymore. I was being remembered by the right people. It's a strange thing, writing a will. You'd think it would feel somber or grim, but for me, it felt steady, like putting up a final wall around the house, one nobody could knock down. I sat across from Carl Jennings, my old friend and lawyer, in his quiet office above the bakery downtown. Same desk, same dusty bookshelf filled with binders and framed pictures of grandkids. He looked older than I remembered, thinner hair, a slight shake in his hand as he poured coffee, but his eyes were still sharp. "So," he said, pushing his glasses up his nose, "you're sure about this?" "I've never been more sure about anything in my life." He nodded slowly. "Tell me again what you want." I took a breath. "The house goes to Emilio Rojas. Full title, full rights, no conditions. If I pass before him, it's his. If I outlive him, it goes to his daughter Sophia. If either of them refuses it, it goes to the veterans shelter on 4th and Maple." Carl raised an eyebrow. "And your son?" I shook my head. "He gets nothing." We sat in silence for a beat. "I can add a clause," he said carefully. "If the will is contested, the entire estate is liquidated and donated, no second chances." "Yes," I said without hesitation. "Make that clause ironclad." He didn't write anything yet, just looked at me with those old, searching eyes. "Joe, you know this isn't reversible. Once this is signed, he can't undo it." "That's the point." He leaned back, exhaled, then gave me a slow nod. "Okay, let's do it right." We spent the next hour going over every detail. Property lines, bank accounts, savings bonds I'd forgotten I even had. We talked about power of attorney, medical directives, emergency contacts. Carl worked quietly, respectfully. No judgment, just the methodical work of someone who'd seen more families torn apart than put back together. When it came time to sign, my hand shook a little. Not from doubt, from something deeper, the weight of finality, the feeling of laying a cornerstone or closing a door. Carl slid the document across the desk. "You want me to notify your son?" "No," Let him find out when the time comes. I signed. The pen made a soft scratching sound on the thick paper, and just like that, everything changed. It wasn't about revenge, not really. It was about truth, about honoring what the house meant, what I meant, what Marjorie meant. I walked out of that office into the afternoon sun feeling both hollow and whole at the same time. Like something sacred had just been buried, and something else was just starting to bloom. I stopped at Marjorie's grave on the way home. The cemetery was quiet, just wind, birdsong, and the low hum of passing cars in the distance. Her headstone was simple, elegant, just like her. Marjorie Ellen Ward, beloved wife, mother, gardener of souls, 1949–1996. I knelt beside the roses I'd planted last spring. They were scraggly now, summer had dried them out, but a few buds still held color. "I did it, Marge," I said softly. "I protected the house, our house." I placed a folded copy of the new will beneath the flower vase. "You always said a home is more than walls. It's who you welcome inside." I stayed there for a while, just listening to the wind. Later that week, Emilio came by again, this time with Sophia. She was 11, small and bright-eyed, with a sketchbook under her arm. "We brought empanadas," he said, grinning. She handed me a tin, shyly. "They're my grandma's recipe." I invited them in and we sat at the kitchen table, the same one my son used to do his homework on, the same one Marjorie used to polish every Sunday. We ate, we laughed, we talked. Sophia showed me her drawings, one of a treehouse, one of a smiling sun with sunglasses, one of a house with big windows, a garden out front, and a sign that read, "Home." She pointed at it. "That's this house," she said proudly. "It's gonna be ours, right?" I looked at Emilio. He looked like he wanted to say something, maybe protest, maybe deflect. I smiled at her and said, "Yes, someday it will be." Her face lit up like a lamp. After they left, I walked room to room again, but this time it wasn't out of grief, it was preparation. I dusted the top shelves, sorted tools in the garage, fixed the broken hinge on the back screen door. Every corner I touched, I imagined them there. Laughter in the hallway, footsteps on the stairs, a kitchen filled with Sunday meals and spilled juice and tiny arguments about bedtime. It was healing, what I felt. I thought about my son, where he might be that night, probably sipping something expensive in a condo filled with things that looked nice but meant nothing. I didn't feel hate, I just felt distance, the kind of distance you don't cross anymore. Not because you can't, but because you've finally accepted the other side is empty. And that's okay, because I was building something else now, not just a legacy, but a home, for people who understood what that word really meant. He didn't even knock. I heard the key turn in the lock around noon on a Thursday, a sound I hadn't heard in months. My son still had a copy, one I'd forgotten to ask for back. The door creaked open like it was nothing, like this was still his place to walk into. I was in the living room polishing the old photo frame of our first Christmas in the house, Marjorie in her blue dress, our boy in footy pajamas, holding a toy train. I stood up slowly, frame still in hand, as he stepped inside with a folder tucked under his arm and a determined look on his face. "Pops," he said, nodding. "We need to talk." "No, hello." "No, how've you been?" I set the frame down gently on the table. "You just let yourself in now?" I figured it'd save time. He said it like we were in the middle of a business negotiation, not a father and son conversation. He walked past me, uninvited, and sat at the kitchen table like he used to. Only now he spread out his papers like a salesman laying out his pitch. "We've been looking at facilities," he said, tapping the top sheet with his pen. "There's a great one just 20 minutes from here. Brookside didn't pan out, but this one's even better. Clean, new, activities, medical care on site." I stared at him, my heart pounding slowly but heavy, like a slow drum beat before a storm. "You've been looking," I said, "without me. You're getting older, Dad. You had a fall. Remember how scared we all were?" He didn't wait for an answer. "You need support, constant support." "You mean you don't want to be responsible?" He blinked. "That's not fair." "No," I said, walking over to the chair across from him. "What's not fair is planning my eviction while I'm still breathing." He ignored that. Flipped to another page. "They have memory care wings, game nights. They even let you bring a few pieces of furniture from home so it won't feel like a—" "Like a what?" He stopped, then said it, softer. "Like a facility." "Is that what you think I need? A corner in a facility? A bed and a few drawers while you gut this house?" He looked annoyed now, tired, as if I was being difficult on purpose. "Dad," he sighed, "you don't get it. This isn't just about you. That house is sitting on almost $500,000 in equity. You're living here alone and you want it," I finished. "You want the house." He didn't respond. "You can't even say it," I said, standing again, the chair scraping slightly on the tile. "You couldn't ask me like a man. You had to sneak around. You brought in agents behind my back. You filed applications for facilities. You tried to move me like I'm some expired lease." His jaw tightened. "We were trying to do what's best for you." "No," I said. "You were doing what's easiest for you." For a moment neither of us spoke. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a dog barked. Somewhere in the distance, a car door slammed. Then he said something I will never forget. "You're not going to live forever, Dad. At some point, this house needs to move on. Why not now? Why not now? As if I were already gone. As if the home I bled for, wept in, built board by board, was already a museum piece, an asset to be flipped." He stood up then, gathering his papers, clearly thinking this conversation was done. "I'll send over some info," he said. "Just look at it. Please, don't be stubborn." I didn't stop him from walking out. I didn't raise my voice, didn't curse. I just waited until the door clicked shut behind him. Then I went to my desk, opened the drawer, and pulled out the folder with my will. I read through every page again, not out of doubt, but as ritual, as affirmation. I walked room to room, touching the door frames, the corners of picture frames, the windows Marjorie used to wipe down every Sunday. I packed the documents carefully into a larger envelope, along with a letter I'd written in longhand the night before, a letter explaining everything, every choice, every line in the will. I wasn't angry, not anymore. I was done being hurt, done waiting for someone to remember who I was. That evening, I called Emilio. "Think you could help me with something?" I asked. "Anything, Mr. Joe." I smiled. "It's time we fix the porch, properly." He showed up the next morning with two friends, all in worn jeans and tool belts. They worked quietly, carefully. Measured twice, cut once. I made sandwiches and lemonade like I used to do for my son when he helped me build the original railing all those years ago. As Emilio hammered in a final nail, he looked up at me and asked, "You sure about all this?" "I've never been more sure." He hesitated. "I don't know what to say." "You already said it," I replied. "The day you stayed with me in the hospital when no one else did." He looked down, eyes full. Didn't speak again. The porch gleamed by sunset. Fresh boards, new railing, strong again, the way I felt inside. I stood out there long after they'd left, watching the sky fade into orange and gold, the first crickets chirping in the distance. This house was mine, still. And the next time I'd step foot off this porch, it wouldn't be in fear or shame. It would be in truth. Because the confrontation was coming, and I was ready. Do you think the father made the right choice? Comment and don't forget to like and subscribe for more true life stories. I wasn't invited. The text came from my niece, Denny's daughter, bless her heart. Cousin Mark's baby shower. Family's all coming. Thought you should know, just in case you didn't get the invite. Of course I didn't get it. It was being hosted at my son's house, a sleek, sterile condo in a part of town where everyone has two-car garages and silent neighbors. The kind of place where shoes stay off and emotions stay hidden. I put on my best shirt, pressed the sleeves, tucked it in clean, wore Marjorie's favorite tie, navy blue with thin silver stripes. She said it made me look respectable and quiet, which, in her world, meant trustworthy. I didn't come to start a fight. I came to finish something. I drove myself. No music, just the sound of the tires humming under me and the soft crinkle of the envelope on the passenger seat, my will, sealed and signed, and a few extra copies, just in case. The driveway was packed. Family I hadn't seen in months mingled on the lawn, holding plastic cups, laughing in little circles. My son stood near the grill, flipping skewers with one hand, his other arm draped around his wife. His eyes met mine as I walked up the drive. You could have heard a pin drop. Conversation dipped, heads turned. "Dad," he said stiffly, "didn't expect you." "No," I said, "you didn't." I stepped onto the patio, past the food table, past the folding chairs and balloons, and laid the envelope down in the middle of the table near the cake. People watched, confused, curious. "This," I said, voice calm but carrying, "is my will." Someone coughed. A plate clattered. My son stepped forward, eyes narrowing. "Dad, what are you doing?" "I'm doing what you should have done," I replied, being honest. He tried to laugh it off, but his face was tight. "Can we talk about this later?" "No," I said. "We'll talk about it now, in front of everyone. Since you made your plans in secret, it's only fair I share mine in public." His wife looked furious, already whispering to a cousin. I looked around the yard, familiar faces, some sympathetic, some awkward, all watching. "I know you've been planning to move me out, sell the house, cash in on a life you didn't build. I know about the appraisals, the retirement communities, the way you talk about my home like it's a burden." He stepped closer. "Okay, that's enough." I raised a hand. "You've had your turn. Now it's mine." I opened the envelope and pulled out the top copy of the will, holding it up. "This house, the one your mother and I built with every dollar and dream we had, will not go to you. Not now. Not ever." Gasps. A few murmurs. My son's face went pale. "I've left it to someone who showed me kindness when you couldn't. A man who sat beside me in the hospital when you said you were too busy. A man who brought soup when I could barely stand. A man who never asked for anything." "Are you kidding me?" he snapped. "You're giving the house to a janitor?" "Emilio," I said calmly. "His name is Emilio, and yes, I am." "You're insane," his wife hissed. I looked at her, then back to him. "You planned my future without asking me. You talked about my house like it was already yours. You walked in and out like I was just a temporary inconvenience. You didn't just forget me. You erased me." He was shaking now, not with sadness, with rage. "You really want to humiliate me, in front of family." I looked around. Family should know the truth. The truth is, you stopped being my son the moment you stopped acting like one. A silence fell so deep you could hear the wind moving through the bushes. Then a small voice, a child's voice, broke through. "Grandpa?" I turned. My grandson, 7 years old, standing near the edge of the patio, unsure whether to run toward me or stay frozen. I knelt. "Hey, buddy." He looked at me, then at his father, then back at me. "You're mad?" "No, sweetheart, just telling the truth." He stepped forward and hugged me. Simple, pure, no questions. I stood up, ruffled his hair, and turned back to the crowd. My affairs are in order. You can contest it if you want, but if you do, every penny goes to the veterans' shelter. You won't see a cent. That's legal. That's final. My son stood there, helpless, furious, cornered by his own silence. And I felt lighter than I had in years. I walked away, slow and steady, each step cutting through the hush behind me. No one tried to stop me. When I reached the car, I looked back one last time, just once. My grandson waved. That was enough. I drove home, to my home, and for the first time, it truly felt like mine again. The house was so quiet when I got home, I could hear the clock in the hallway ticking. Tick, tick, tick. It had always ticked like that, loud and steady, but I'd gotten used to it over the years. That night, though, it felt louder, or maybe it was the silence pressing in from all sides that made it ring like a drum. I set my keys on the table, took off my shoes, and walked through the house like I was returning from war. Everything was exactly where it had been. The photo of Marjorie on the mantel, the little ceramic bowl by the front door where I tossed my change, the sun fading through the front curtains, warm orange light spreading across the worn hardwood floor. But something was different, not in the house, in me. I had said everything I needed to say, not with cruelty, not with vengeance, but with finality. There was no yelling, no scene, just truth. And now there was silence. I made myself a cup of tea and sat in my recliner, letting the steam rise in gentle swirls. My legs ached, my chest felt tight, but not from fear or sadness. It was something else, the ache of letting go of the hope that he'd come around, letting go of the father I used to be, the one who bent and bent and bent, hoping to stay in his son's good graces. I turned on the radio, soft jazz, nothing too lively, and leaned back. Then I laughed, a short, surprised laugh that escaped my mouth before I even knew it was coming. Because for the first time in months, maybe years, I felt free. In town, the story started spreading like spring fire. Not because I told it, but because families talk. Someone's aunt was there. Someone's cousin shared the moment. It trickled through church pews and bakery lines and hardware store counters. People started showing up, some out of curiosity, some out of respect. Mrs. Cartwright from next door knocked the next morning. She brought a casserole, tuna, with those little crunchy onions on top. "You did what a lot of us are too afraid to do," she said, handing me the dish with both hands. "Good for you." Later, Dennis from the VFW stopped by. He didn't say much, just dropped off a bag of tools he said I might find useful and clapped me on the shoulder. "I've got your back, Joe," he said. The silence became something different, not lonely, but peaceful, earned. I found myself spending more time on the porch, watching kids ride bikes up and down the block, waving to neighbors I hadn't spoken to in years. It was like a part of the neighborhood had awakened, like the house was breathing again. Sometimes Emilio would stop by on his break from the hospital, always with something, a bag of oranges, a warm cup of soup, a newspaper I'd forgotten to pick up. "You all right?" he asked once, eyes searching mine. I nodded. "Better than I've been in a long time." He smiled. "You look it." I started walking again. Not far, just to the park 2 blocks over, past the trees Marjorie used to point out in spring when the blossoms made everything smell like sugar and hope. I'd sit on the bench near the pond and just watch, ducks drifting, kids yelling, couples arguing softly over sandwiches, and I'd think, not about the past, not even about my son. Mostly, I thought about the house, what it had given me, what it had taken from me, what it still could be. I started making lists, quiet, hopeful lists, things I could repair, things I could change, not to sell, not to impress, but to preserve, to honor. One afternoon, I got a letter in the mail. A real one, not a bill. It was from my grandson, written in big, careful letters, crayon, a little smudged. Hi, Grandpa. I miss you. Mommy said you're mad, but I'm not. Can I come over again? I sat down on the porch and cried. Not loud, not long. Just a few steady tears that left salt lines down my cheeks. Because that letter, those clumsy, honest words, reminded me that blood may fail you, but innocence still shines through. The next day, I mailed him a reply. I didn't mention his parents. I just said, yes, you can always come over. Grandpa is always here. And then, one evening, something unexpected happened. The nurse who cared for me after my surgery, Denise, her name was, stopped by. She'd heard the story from Emilio and wanted to check in. We talked for over an hour on the porch. She told me about her father, how he'd died alone because her brother shipped him off too early. She said what I did gave her hope. We made tea. She stayed longer than expected, and before she left she said, "That house of yours has a lot more life left in it." I smiled. So do I. She laughed, warm and surprised. I believe you. As summer crept in, I started sleeping with the windows open again. The creak of the house, the rustle of leaves, the faraway bark of a neighbor's dog, it all felt right. My son never called, not once. And you know what? I didn't expect him to. Not anymore. Because sometimes silence is not an absence, it's a boundary. And this one was mine. It started with a question from Sophia. She was sitting at my kitchen table, swinging her legs under the chair, drawing on the back of an old envelope. Emilio was fixing a loose cabinet door, grumbling under his breath in Spanish as he worked. I was pouring lemonade, the kind Marjorie used to make with fresh lemons and a little honey. Sophia looked up and asked, "Mr. Joe, if you don't have grandkids who visit a lot, can we?" I blinked. "Visit?" She nodded eagerly. "Me and my cousins. We could help you fix stuff. My cousin knows how to paint. Daddy said you have a big attic. What's in there?" That simple question stayed with me for days. What was in there? So I climbed up to the attic the next morning. Dusty boxes, old quilts, broken lamps, memories. Mostly, it was things I hadn't touched in decades, remnants of a life that no longer fit. But what struck me most was the space, big, open space, enough for something more. Later that week, I sat on the porch with Emilio and shared an idea that had been forming quietly in the back of my mind. "I want to turn the house into something," I said. He looked confused. "It is something." "No, I mean more than a house, a place, a space for people who need one." He sipped his coffee, eyes narrowing in curiosity. "Night shift nurses, hospital staff, janitors, people like you, folks who work late and live far. Maybe we fix up the attic. Get a couple of beds up there. Make it a place to rest between shifts." He didn't say anything at first. Then after a long pause, he said, "That's what your wife would have done, isn't it?" I smiled. "Exactly." He nodded. "Then we do it." That's how the plan began. No fanfare, no announcements, just two tired men and a dream. We started slow. Emilio brought tools. I brought out old savings I'd tucked away in coffee tins and sock drawers. We cleared the attic, pulled up the warped floorboards, and opened the windows to air out years of stale air. Word spread. Not the way it had after the will. This time it spread softly, kindly. Denise, the nurse from the hospital, showed up with paint cans. "Neutral tones," she said. "Peaceful, easy on tired eyes." A neighbor down the street, Harold, who ran the hardware shop, dropped off insulation rolls. "Heard you were doing something good," he said, almost shy. Even Mrs. Cartwright's grandson came by, helped replace a cracked window pane. We weren't just fixing a house. We were building something new. The attic became the first project. New walls, new floors, fresh coats of paint. We added a bathroom and a small kitchenette with a hot plate and a fridge. Sophia helped pick the curtains. Soft green, she said, like the leaves in spring. When we were done, it didn't look fancy, but it looked loved. And the first night someone stayed, a nurse named Carla who'd just finished a 14-hour shift and couldn't face the hour-long drive home. I sat on the porch with Emilio and said, "This is the best the house has felt in years." He didn't answer, just clinked his coffee mug against mine. We called it Marjorie's room. Felt fitting. I started keeping a logbook. Who came, when they stayed, what they needed. Some just wanted a nap. Others left thank you notes, scribbled on scrap paper. One wrote, "I haven't slept this peacefully in months. Bless you." That note I taped to the fridge. The more the house changed, the more I did too. I woke up earlier, took longer walks, read again, not just the newspaper but actual books. Marjorie's old gardening journals, some Steinbeck, a dusty Hemingway I hadn't touched in years. I made plans, real ones. Called the city about permits, talked to Carl about putting the new setup in legal writing. Called a non-profit consultant my niece connected me with, a smart woman named Brenda who said, "You've got a story here, Mr. Ward. Let's make sure it lasts." We drew up plans for Marjorie's haven. Not a shelter, not a clinic, just a space to rest. I didn't want beds lined in rows or rules taped to doors. I wanted quiet, dignity. A soft light left on in the hallway, the smell of something warm from the kitchen, the sound of a home still breathing after all these years. Emilio and I sat down one night, covered in sawdust and toasted with root beer. "To the house," I said. "To Marjorie," he added. "To new beginnings," I finished. And for the first time, I didn't look back when I said it. The past would always be part of this place. The laughter, the loss, the boy who once called me his hero and the man who forgot how to. But now there was something more, something living. And I was part of it, not just as a memory, but as a maker of new ones. I never thought the sound of footsteps upstairs would make me smile again. For so long, the silence in that house had felt like punishment, echoing through empty rooms, pressing down on me like dust I couldn't shake off. But now, those soft, tired footfalls above me each night were something else entirely. Life. Emilio and I finished installing the third cot in the attic just before summer really hit. A few ceiling fans, blackout curtains, and some donated quilts from the ladies at the church made it feel almost cozy. People started calling it the nap loft. Sometimes nurses left little snacks in the kitchenette, granola bars, fruit, water bottles. It was becoming what I dreamed it could be, a sanctuary. Not loud, not perfect, but full of peace. The folks who came through weren't always the same, but the energy was. One night, a young nurse named Lexi stayed over. She looked no older than 25, bone-tired but polite, and thanked me twice for the hot tea I left on the counter. The next morning, she sat with me on the porch and said, "I didn't know houses like this still existed." "What kind of house?" I asked. She smiled. "The kind where someone leaves the light on for you." That stuck with me. The light was always on now. I made sure of it. Emilio's family started dropping by more often, too. His sister brought tamales. His nephew fixed the kitchen sink without even being asked. Sophia became a regular fixture, coloring on the living room rug, humming tunes under her breath while I read the paper. They didn't treat me like a guest. They treated me like theirs. One Saturday afternoon, Emilio and I were sitting on the porch when he turned to me and said, "You know, my kids call this place Grandpa Joe's." I nearly dropped my lemonade. "I told them not to," he added quickly, almost apologetically. But they said, "It feels like that, like you're part of us." I didn't answer right away. I just looked out at the yard where Sophia was chasing a butterfly, her giggle rising over the hum of the cicadas. Then I said, "It's funny. I used to think family was blood, name, history. And now? Now I think family is who shows up, who stays, who looks you in the eye and says, 'I see you.'" He nodded. "Then we're family." Not long after, someone else started coming around again. My grandson. At first it was just a short visit with his mom. She waited in the car. He came up the steps holding a picture he drew, of me, standing beside a house with a big red heart above it. "I told my teacher this is your house," he said proudly. "I told her you're helping people sleep." I smiled and bent down to his level. "That's right. And it's your house too, you know." He blinked. "Really?" "You helped build it. Every memory in here. It's part of you." The second visit, he stayed for an hour. We made sandwiches. He asked about the tools in the shed. I let him hammer a nail into a block of wood, just like I had with his father all those years ago. He beamed. "I'm strong like you." I didn't correct him, because in that moment he made me feel stronger than I had in decades. The third time, he came alone. Just him and a backpack. His mother dropped him off and waved but didn't come up. He stayed the night. We watched old cartoons, ate popcorn, talked about dinosaurs and stars and what he wanted to be when he grew up. "I think I want to be someone who builds stuff," he said. I smiled. "You already are." That night I found myself staring at the ceiling long after he'd fallen asleep in the guest room. The house felt full again, not just with people, but with something deeper: love, respect, truth. Not the kind you're born into, the kind you earn, the kind that finds you after loss, after betrayal, after silence. One evening we hosted a small dinner for some of the regulars, the nurses, Emilio's family, the folks who'd helped fix up the attic. We pushed the tables together on the porch, strung up some lights, and made spaghetti with garlic bread and lemonade. Laughter floated out into the street. Music played from an old speaker. People shared stories, not dramatic ones, just simple memories. At one point, Denise, the nurse who'd first sat with me months ago, raised a glass and said, "To Joe, for reminding us what home feels like." Everyone clinked cups, even Sophia. I looked around that long table, at the people who chose to be here, who chose me, and felt something I hadn't felt since Marjorie was alive. Belonging. Real, grounded, steady belonging. I didn't need anything more than that. Not apology, not recognition, not even understanding. Because I had found my people, and they had found me. Later that night, as I stood in the doorway watching everyone leave, Emilio walked up beside me and said, "You ever regret it, cutting your son out?" I thought for a long time, then said, "I regret who he became, but not the choice I made." Emilio nodded. "Me too." We stood there a while longer. Then he said, "See you tomorrow, Grandpa Joe." I smiled. Yeah, tomorrow. And the day after that. And the one after that. Because this wasn't just my house anymore. It was ours. And it was finally full of real family. Have you ever had to walk away from your own blood? Tell us in the comments. It was a Tuesday, mid-morning. The sun was already high enough to cast a warm glow through the front windows. I was folding laundry in the living room. Sophia had spilled juice on a blanket the night before, and I'd promised her I'd clean it before she came back. Then came the knock. Not the doorbell, not a shout from the yard. Just a knock, soft, hesitant, like someone unsure if they were welcome. I opened the door and there he was, my son, dressed in a pressed shirt, hands in his pockets, a look on his face I couldn't quite read. Not anger, not smugness, just tired. I stood in the doorway for a long moment, unsure what to say. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Hey, Pops." I didn't answer, just moved aside and gestured toward the porch. We sat. The same two chairs Marjorie and I used to sit in every evening, the ones I'd nearly thrown out once before deciding to repaint them instead. He didn't say anything at first. Neither did I. There was no rush. Finally, he exhaled. "So, I heard." I raised an eyebrow. "About the will." He nodded. "Yeah, word got around." I said nothing. He rubbed his hands together. "I'm not here to argue, or beg, or yell." "Good," I said. He flinched, just barely. "I just wanted to understand." "You wanted to understand," I repeated slowly, tasting the words like something foreign. "I messed up," he said, staring out at the street. "I know that." A long pause. "I think I stopped seeing you as a person," he said. "You became a responsibility, an obstacle. That stung, but I appreciated the honesty." He looked at his hands. "I didn't mean to become that guy. I was just busy, ambitious, tired, selfish. Pick a word." I stayed quiet. "I've been thinking a lot since the party," he said. "Since you came, since you made your choice." I nodded. He turned to me. "You're not wrong, Dad, about any of it. I was trying to take something that wasn't mine. I told myself I was helping you, but really, I just didn't want to deal with you." That hit deeper than I expected. "But seeing you stand there," he continued, "saying what you said, doing what you did, it made me realize something. You're not the one who failed." He looked at me, really looked, and said, "I did." There was silence again, but this time it didn't feel like distance. It felt like space, the kind you leave when something heavy is finally set down. I studied his face, the lines, the tired eyes, the shape of a jaw that used to lean into my shoulder when he was a boy. "I'm not here to ask for the house back," he said. "I know that ship sailed. I'm not here to change your will." He looked away. "I'm just here." He paused, then added, "I'd like my son to still know his grandfather, if that's something you'd want too." I let the words settle. I could have said a lot. I could have opened old wounds, listed every slight, every silence, every insult. I could have demanded more than words, more than one visit, but I didn't, because something in his voice, in his eyes, told me he already knew all that. He had to live with it, just like I had. I took a slow breath, then said, "You can visit him here. He's welcome any time. You can walk him to the door. You can even come in for coffee." He looked surprised, but I continued. "That doesn't mean things go back to how they were. It doesn't mean I forget. But it does mean I'm willing to let him grow up with the truth." He nodded slowly. "Thank you." I studied him a moment longer. "You're not the boy I raised," I said gently. "But maybe one day you'll remember him." He swallowed hard. "I'd like to try." We sat a little longer, not as father and son, but maybe as two men, finally seeing each other without the fog of expectation or resentment. He stood to go. I didn't offer a hug. He didn't ask for one. But as he stepped off the porch, he turned and said, "That house, it's beautiful, Dad. I didn't see it before." "It hasn't changed," I said. "You did." He nodded and walked away. I watched him go, not with anger, not even with sadness, but with clarity. He wasn't the villain in my story. He was the caution, the reminder of what happens when love is taken for granted. That evening I sat on the porch as the sun dipped low. Emilio walked by with Sophia, and she waved her arms wildly. "Grandpa Joe, I drew more flowers," I waved back. And for a moment, everything was still. My son had visited. We'd said what needed to be said, and while there was no full forgiveness, there was something close to peace, not a reunion, Not a return, but a recognition. And sometimes, that's enough. The banner was simple. Welcome to Marjorie's Haven. White letters on blue cloth, strung between the porch columns with care. Sophia had helped paint it, one careful brushstroke at a time, her tongue poking out the corner of her mouth as she focused. Emilio hung it up that morning, standing on the same ladder I once used to string Christmas lights when my son was a boy. The porch was lined with chairs. Extra tables were brought out from neighbors' garages. Potted plants sat by the steps. A radio played soft music, and the smell of garlic bread and lemon bars drifted through the air. We were holding a little ceremony. Nothing official. No city council. No ribbon cutting with gold scissors. Just the people who'd made this place breathe again. Emilio was first to speak. He stood beside me on the porch and cleared his throat, holding a paper in his hand but never looking at it once. "This house," he said, voice steady, "saved more than my shift schedule. It gave my family somewhere to belong, and it gave Mr. Joe, my friend, the chance to do what few people get to do, rewrite the ending of their story." There was a round of gentle claps. I smiled but said nothing yet. Next was Denise, the nurse who first sat beside me when no one else would. She held up a photo, a grainy black and white of the attic space before we'd fixed it. "This was what it looked like the day I first napped there," she said. "And this," she turned it to show a second photo, "is what it looked like after a long shift last week when I came in and found a note on the pillow that read, 'Rest easy, you're home.'" That note was from Sophia. Then it was my turn. I stood, my hands wrapped around the porch railing, the house stretching behind me like a patient old friend. The crowd, maybe 20 people, went quiet. "I want to tell you something," I said, "something I never said enough." I paused, looking out over the yard. The same yard where I once taught my son to throw a baseball. The same spot where Marjorie used to plant her peonies. This house was never just wood and paint. It was Marjorie's dream, my promise, our work. We built it one paycheck at a time, one argument at a time, one prayer at a time. A few heads nodded. And for a while, I forgot what it meant. I forgot who it was for. I thought it was for legacy, for family, for blood. But blood, it doesn't always stay warm. A hush. But love? Love keeps the walls standing. Love makes a hallway feel like a hug. Love, not blood, is what makes a house a home. I took a breath, eyes scanning the faces in front of me. Neighbors, friends, nurses, Emilio's children, chosen family. So now, this house belongs to those who need rest, those who give without asking, those who walk through the world tired and unthanked. Another breath. And to those who still remember what it means to care. I looked upward, toward the little window of the attic, the new curtains flapping slightly in the breeze. "I like to think Marjorie's up there," I said, voice quiet. Not haunting, just watching, smiling. Someone let out a soft chuckle. I smiled too. And then I stepped down the porch stairs and let the celebration begin. The kids played tag in the yard. Sophia gave out hand-drawn maps of the house. "This is the nap room. This is Grandpa Joe's chair. This is the snack corner." Emilio grilled sausages. Denise's husband played the harmonica, while a nurse from the night shift danced barefoot in the grass. I stood near the garden bed and watched my home live again, not as a museum, not as a prize, but as something soft, open, kind. Later, my grandson arrived with his mother. She didn't come up to the porch, just waved politely from the car. He ran toward me, arms full of dandelions, and hugged my legs tight. "These are for Marjorie," he said solemnly. I took them. She loved them. We placed them by her rose bush, where her little stone angel still stood. The same one I'd nearly thrown away once before Emilio gently cleaned the moss from its face. As the sun dipped low, casting everything in a golden glow, I sat back in my chair and let it all settle. The laughter, the music, the soft creak of the porch beneath tired feet. This was what Marjorie always wanted. Not a house filled with things, a house filled with life. Before night fell, I wrote a letter, folded it neatly and placed it in the drawer beneath her photo. It read, "Dear Marjorie, we did it. The house still breathes, still welcomes, still holds warmth. You'd be proud of what it became, of who it's for now. And I think you'd be proud of me too. With all my love, always. Joe." I closed the drawer, turned off the light and stepped out onto the porch once more. The stars were out. The porch light glowed softly, and for the first time in years, I felt no weight in my chest, only peace. Marjorie's house lived again, and so did I.